invite you to open your Bible to the book of Job. Job chapter 1, I believe we're ready for verse 6. We won't say that again. We'll be past verse 6 after tonight. Now, let me reassure you, Hayden, he's sitting there shaking his head no. The first, especially the first chapter, we could say the first and second chapters of Job, we will spend more time in these two than we will in the ones going forward. Maybe quite a bit in 3, but not near what we are here in 1 and 2. And then when we get to 38, especially 40 and 41, but from 38 to 41 where God is speaking, and then 42, the closing of the book, we'll spend quite a bit of time in those chapters also. The other chapters, my initial thoughts are this. We'll read through when we get to chapter 4 and 5 with Eliphaz. We'll read through those, making some comments, Job's reply, then Bildad, Job's reply, Zophar, Job's reply. Then we'll be a little more selective on particular verses in the conversations as we go. Because if we tried to go through it in detail, it would take us a long time to get through 42 chapters. And we don't want to do that. So, that being said, Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12, let's read it together. And what we have in verses 6 through 12 is Satan's accusation. Okay? Job chapter 1, verses 6 through 12. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. Now, we have 3 particulars that are introduced to us here. We've already been introduced to the primary character. We'll use that term, understanding we're talking about figures in the book. Job in verses 1 through 5. Now Jehovah God, Satan. Those are really the 2 primary, there are 3 primary figures or persons in the book, Job, Satan, and God. But we're also introduced here to the sons of God. We'll talk about that shortly. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? All right, if in other words, where'd you come from? What's an implication? Anybody have a thought? Do what? Been causing trouble? Okay. Well, just hold on to that thought. Whence comest thou? Okay. Then Satan, and also, why does God ask the question? Does he not know where he's been? That's another thing we'll consider. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down in it. Well, that's 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walketh about. Where's he walking? Walking up and down in the earth, walking to and fro in it, seeking whom he may devour. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job? Could you imagine that Jehovah God throws Job under the bus in the opening of the book? Satan doesn't come asking about Job. As far as we know, Satan doesn't even know anything about Job. God just asked him, Where have you been? Satan tells him, he says, well, God says, what about Job? Well, that's interesting. Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Now that is God's assessment of the man Job. That's also what's stated in the first verse of chapter 1, which is also God's assessment of the book of Job the man. Because the writer of the book was an inspired man writing what God wanted him to write. And so even at the beginning, and then here again now from the mouth of God himself, God's assessment of Job. A man, he is perfect, that is blameless and upright, one that feareth God. He holds God in the highest of regard, reverence him, and escheweth evil, that is, he shuns from evil or turns from evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? What's he mean by that? Okay. Do you think Job respects you for nothing? So you see the implication there. You're a fraud. That's what Satan's saying to God. You're a fraud. You're having to bribe Job just to get him to worship you. Verse 10, hast not thou made an hedge about him? and about his house, and about all that he hath on every side. Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. Is there anyone in here whose substance through the years has increased? Who's responsible for that? Well, Jehovah God has given us all that we have. Well, I wish we had time right now to just drive a stake right here and go to Luke chapter 16 and the parable of the unjust steward. And here's the gist of that, the parable of the unjust steward. All that we have, all of our possessions have been given to us by God. That is, they are entrusted to us by God. Everything that I have is entrusted to me, and I one day will answer for those things that have been put into my trust. Okay? God blesses the hands of all men. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he shall curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Who is sovereign over all? God is. Who's the provider of all? God is. Who's the protector of all? God is. But guess what God does here? I put Job in your hands. You say he serves me only because? Will Job serve you? I'll put him under your power. How will Satan coax Job to honor him? Does Satan coax Job to honor him? He doesn't, which tells me that wasn't his goal to begin with, to win Job's devotion. That never was his plan. The Lord said unto him, Behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So everything that he has is in your power, but you can't touch the man. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. Okay, now there again, Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. I'll ask the question again. What does that tell us about Satan? Whence comest thou? Satan goes forth from the presence of the Lord. What do we learn about Satan in those two thoughts? Okay, not in heaven. He was there in the presence of the Lord, though. Okay. He is not omnipresent. He went from point A to point B, and then from point B back to point A again. See, God sees all. God is omnipresent. He's everywhere present. Satan's not. Satan doesn't possess the attributes of deity. Satan can't make any man do anything. You ever heard somebody use this excuse? The devil made me do it. The devil never made anybody do anything. The devil could only tempt Jesus to jump off of the pinnacle of the temple, but what did he not do? He couldn't push him. The devil can't push us into doing anything. Now, he can he can tempt us, but he's not all powerful. All right. These things being said, let's go back to verse 6. And I don't know, Hayden blessed us and gave us some extra time, so I'm going to be thankful for that. Let's look at verse 6, and let's talk about the sons of God. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Well, the sons of God here, I suggest to you, are the angels. We're not going to take time and look at every occasion in the Old Testament where we see the sons of God, but there are 5 particular times in the Old Testament, at least in the King James translation, where we see that phrase, the sons of God. A couple of them in Genesis chapter 6, where there it refers to the righteous among men. The righteous among men, where the sons of God married the daughters of men. So you have the contrast of the righteous and the unrighteous. But in Job, the term sons of God is used on 3 particular occasions. We see it here in chapter 1 and verse 6, then again in chapter 2 and verse 1. Look at it. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. The third occasion is in chapter 38. So open with me to chapter 38. Let's just open our Bibles there. Job chapter 38. Now, chapter 38, notice how it opens up. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said. So 38, 39, 40, and 41. Earlier in the book, Job says, I wish I knew where God was. I'd go talk to him. I wish God would come talk to me. I demand an audience with God. I demand an answer to why I'm suffering this way. Job never says, I'm sinless. He says, I'm innocent. I don't know why I'm suffering. I want an explanation. And then he even, on one occasion, says, you can go first and then I'll answer. Or I'll go first and then you can answer. Well, chapter 38, God says, Job, I'll go first. And then, chapter 41, God says, okay, Job, your turn. And Job says, I don't have anything else to say. So we open up here in chapter 38 of Jehovah God speaking. And notice what he says, verse 3, gird up now thy loins like a man, I'll demand of thee. All right, you won't talk to me? Then, okay. Now, I think it's interesting. Gird up now thy loins like a man. Man cannot stand before Jehovah God. Who can look God in the eye and speak to him one-on-one? Only deity. And that's what God is going to lay out here, but I'm jumping ahead of myself. Gird up thy loins like a man. Roll up your sleeves and let's get down to it. Verse 4, where wast thou when I laid the foundation of the earth? Verse 5, who hath laid the measures thereof? Verse 6, whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? You said we're talking about creation. Where were you, Job, whenever I created all things, when I laid the foundation, when I measured out the size of the earth, whenever I created all these things? Then look at verse 7. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Well, what do we have there? In poetic language, what would that be called? That verse 8 there, verse 7 rather. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. All right, look at the close of it and let's get some explanation. Let's see. First of all, let's skip the morning stars and look at sang together. Skip sons of God and then note shouted for joy. Do you see the parallel there? If we had time, we could go to look at some of the Psalms and we would see parallelism. Anybody here familiar with literature, poetic literature? You have parallelisms where something is said in one phrase and then the same thing is said just in a different terminology. Okay? Athena is my bride. She is my wife. Have I said anything different the second phrase? Okay? It's just saying something there for emphasis. Well, that's what we've got here. When the morning stars sang together. When did the morning stars sing together? When they witnessed all of the creation. And all the sons of God shouted for joy. So the angelic hosts, seeing the creation of all things, sing together and shout for joy, seeing the great wisdom and power of God. And so in the context of Job, a book as a whole, we see the phrase sons of God 3 times. And in chapter 38, it's identified for us as the angels. Referred to as the morning stars singing together, and then all the sons of God shouting for joy. So I suggest to you what we have here, chapter 6, the sons of God, a reference to the angels. Well, they come to present themselves before the Lord. Well, why would the angels come to present themselves before the Lord? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay, they're accountable. So what are they accountable for? Okay, their service. But what do the angels do? Whatever God tells them, the work that he gives them to do. Well, you know, the Bible doesn't reveal to us everything about angels, but it does reveal to us more than maybe what we realize with regards to angels. Let's take some time and look at some passages of Scripture. They came to present themselves before the Lord. Perhaps, as has been implied just in the statements that's been made, perhaps they are coming to give an accounting of the work that God has given them to do that they've accomplished. Okay? Look at Psalm 103. Psalm 103, verses 20 and 21. Psalm 103, 20 and 21. Bless the Lord, ye his angels. Okay? Well, we see who we're talking about in this context, the angels, that excel in strength, that do his commandments. So the angels then are doing the commandments of God, hearkening unto the voice of his word. Bless ye the Lord, all ye his hosts, ye ministers of his that do his pleasure. Well, they're referred to here as angels. They're referred to here as his hosts, as his ministers. Okay? Look at 104, Psalm 104. And let's just read verses 1 through 4. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty. Who coverest thyself with light as with a garment? Who stretcheth out the heaven like as a curtain? Who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters? Who maketh the clouds his chariot? He walketh upon the wings of the wind. Who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire. Well, you see some parallelism there in Psalm 104 and verse 4. And again, here the angels now, we see in chapter 103, verses 20 and 21, they do the commandments of God. They do the work that he bids them. Verse 4, he makes his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire. And so we see here there are times when these ministers, these angels appear then as flaming fires. They're doing the work of God. I wish I had taken time to kind of put this down on paper. But if we think of 2 Kings chapters 1 and 2, and Elijah is carried off from the earth, what was he carried off in? Chariot of fire. I wonder what that was. What was it? Okay, up in the whirlwind. The fire, though, what do you suppose that was? Well, I would suggest perhaps the angelic host. If we had time, we could go into 1 Kings. We'll see Elisha in the city, and there are these chariots, these angelic hosts, and they're represented there of the flames. Look at Daniel chapter 7 and verse 10. Daniel chapter 7 and verse 10. Somebody read that. Well, read 9 and 10. Somebody. Daniel 7, 9 and 10. All right, verse 10 is what I really want to focus on. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, talking about before the throne. Thousands ministered unto him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. And so we have this picture then of this fiery stream issuing to and forth. Again, perhaps the angels doing the bidding of God. Look at chapter 9, Daniel chapter 9, and I'll read verses 20 through 23. Daniel chapter 9, 20 through 23. And whiles I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, whiles I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel. Okay, where have we heard the name Gabriel before? Okay, an angel, Luke chapter 1, Gabriel, identified for us, speaks to Zacharias, also speaks to Mary. Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. Well, caused to fly swiftly from where? Well, perhaps from the throne of God. And he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications, the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved, and therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. Look at the verse 23, the beginning. At the beginning of thy supplications, when you began to pray, the commandment came forth for me to come to you, and I am come to show thee. And Daniel said, even while I was in the prayer, Gabriel showed up. So he came swiftly. He came quickly. And so we have various pictures from Job, from the kings, from Daniel, this idea of the angels doing the work of God. And so in Job chapter 1, perhaps we have there the sons of God are in the presence of the Lord, giving an accounting of their work, receiving work, commandments, bidding of God. Any thoughts or comments or questions as we move forward here? All right. Satan came also among them. Literally there, as I understand it, the Satan. Okay, there's a definite article that should be there. The Satan. The word Satan the meaning of the word is adversary. As the devil, the term devil means slanderer or accuser. And we see the devil doing that. We see Satan doing that here. He's falsely accusing God, or he's slandering God, and also falsely accusing Job in the picture here. Well, Satan has also come before God. Why would Satan come before God? Okay, he's certainly accountable to God. He is a servant of God, though in a continuous state of rebellion. If he's not accountable to God, how could he stand in judgment before God? Therefore, he must be accountable to God. Notice with me Luke chapter 22. Someone, I want you to read. Let's get to Luke chapter 22. And let's look at verse 30. Well, it's just verse 31. 31 and 32. Luke 22, 31 and 32.
And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, indeed, Satan has asked that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail. And when you have returned to me, strengthen your brother.
All right, verse 31. Look at this. Satan hath desired to have you. What did you say it was there rather than desired to have you in verse 31? Asked for you. Anybody have anything different than ask for you or desired to have you? Do what? Demanded. That's a good interpretation of the Greek there. Satan has demanded to have you. The picture is of Satan coming before God, petitioning, asking for, desiring to have Peter, to take him, to try him, and to test him, to sift him as wheat. The idea there is to take him to the ledge to test his faith. That's the idea. Satan has desired to have you. He's demanded to have you so that he can try and test you. And what does Jesus say? But God said no. That's not what he said. He says, but I've prayed for you. So this isn't the only occasion. We could perhaps note some others throughout the Old Testament with picturing Satan before the presence of God, the throne of God. But we see he petitioned for Peter. Here we see he comes, and we have to a degree, he's petitioning for Job. All right, verse 7. Whence comest thou? Well, from going to and fro up in the earth and walking up and down in it. Well, again, 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8, very similar to that thought. I think we have a picture also of Satan here, very prideful. What's he say? This is your realm here in heaven, and all of these hosts adore you and honor you and worship you and do your bidding, but I've been in my kingdom. I rule that kingdom. I think we see a little bit of some pride there. In John chapter 12, verse 31, as well as some other passages in John 12:31, Satan is referred to as the prince of this world. The prince of this world. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 2, he is referred to as the prince of the power of the air. What did he, in the temptations of Jesus in the wilderness, what did Satan tempt Jesus with? If you'll bow down and worship me, what did he say he would do? Okay, go to Luke chapter 4. And let's just notice here. Luke chapter 4. I believe in Luke this is going to be the second of the temptations. Luke, no, it's not. Yes, chapter 4, 1 through 13. Let's see here. Verse 5 and 6. And the devil, taking him up into a high mountain, showed unto him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. Well, we see some type of miraculous ability there, perhaps given to him, allowed for this temptation. So all of the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time, and the devil said unto him, all this power, all this authority over all of these kingdoms will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and whomsoever I will give it. Did Satan have the power to give all of the kingdoms and all the glory and the power of all the kingdoms of the world to Jesus? He said, it's given unto me. That's right. John chapter 8 and verse 44. He was a murderer from the beginning. He is a liar. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own. Yes, sir. Well, I can't speak with any authority at all of Satan being able to give any man anything. But I only have a record in the Scripture when we see Satan only claiming he will give if, though he is a liar, and when he has the opportunity, all that he has is in your power. You can take what he has and multiply it if you want to. All that he has is in your power. He doesn't do that. So the only way I could answer that is when we see Satan with the power, he does nothing but destroy. The question is, why did he destroy? Really should be a question there. I don't see a picture ever. Russell, you ever can you think of any? There's never a time that I ever see Satan doing anything but being in opposition to God. He's not just simply the opponent of God. He's the very opposition of God. And we'll talk about that as we get a little bit further. Derek? Well, he doesn't go to Jesus and say, here's food. He says, you do it. He could have had opportunity to give. We never see Satan giving. We never see Satan even doing an act of kindness at all that I ever see. Now you say, well, can he? Well, I'm not going to speak where I don't have authority, but I'll tell you this is what I see when I see Satan. You have another thought, Hayden? He never even takes and hands it. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's all lying. It's all deceptive. All that he does is for the purpose of destruction, to the destruction of man. The question I want to really set out for you and let it sink in and settle. Why is Satan destroying man? From the opening of Scriptures all the way through, why is he destroying man? The goal is not man. And that's what we see as we get a little bit further here. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay, let's see here. We noted he's referred to as the prince of this world, prince of the power of the air. We looked at the temptation of Jesus. So we have Satan's accusation. Satan's accusation. Let me read verse 7 just one more time. Job chapter 1, verse 7. No, not verse 7. Let's move on to verse 8. The Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job? This is the Lord's observation. We have the accusation. Job only worships you. Job is only devoted to you. Job only walks after your will only because, okay, that's what we're going to get to in 9 through 11, the accusation. Here's the Lord's observation. After asking, where have you been? Well, I've been at my kingdom. Hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none like him in all the earth. Okay. Here's my question. Why does God bring up Job? Yes, sir.
Well, I kind of found it interesting when you said he throws Job under the bus, and I don't necessarily think that's the case.
I don't either.
We find God asking man questions that he knows the answer to a lot of times. This might be exactly why Satan walked in front of God. Stephen, he was already asking for Peter. Maybe God already knows Satan showing up to ask him for Job. Maybe, I mean, these are all conjecture, but I think Satan had already considered Job.
Okay, I agree with you. I agree with you, and we'll demonstrate how we know that to be true. Let's point this out. I meant to point this out with the first question that God asked. God never asked a question for information, always for contemplation. And not for his own contemplation, but for the contemplation of those hearing the question. And asking the question of Satan, whence comest thou? All of the heavenly host are hearing this discussion. Satan is being exposed as prideful. Satan is being exposed as weak. Satan is being exposed as not equal with God. And to all who come after and read the book, Satan is revealed as who he is here. Okay? So, hast thou considered my servant Job? Yes, sir?
I'm not implying that there is a plan of salvation for the devil, because there's not. But is God having the devil consider Job in the sense that Job's life is proof that God is worthy of service and worship? And that's something the devil didn't believe, follow.
Okay. See, I think you've hit on,
Consider his situation.
well, I think you're hitting on everything completely right there. Okay? The worth of God, that God is worthy. Okay? And that's that we're going to go there. Let's get back here to verse 8, because I want to make a point. Hast thou considered my servant Job? In essence, the response here is, if you're the ruler of the earth, if that's your kingdom, if you've been walking to and fro on the earth and walking up and down in it, that's your kingdom, that's your empire, what about Job? You don't have Job in your back pocket. Job doesn't serve you. Job serves me. If that's your kingdom and all of those serve you, what about Job? And so God is exposing who and what Satan truly is to the angelic hosts. Okay? He is not what he purports himself to be. Now, Satan's accusation. And we're going to get to, I kind of planted this thought of God throwing Satan under the bus, and I just used terminology we would all be very familiar with. And I do not believe that's the case. Okay? But let's notice here now, 9, 10, and 11, here's the accusation. Doth Job fear God for naught? And so Satan, what does he do? When he makes that statement, when he asks that question, what does Satan acknowledge? What was the question that God had asked in verse 8? And then how does Satan reply to that? Right? Right? Hear the question. Hast thou considered my servant Job? What does Satan not, how does he not reply? Satan doesn't say, Job? I don't think I've heard of Job. But I'm glad you brought him up, because now I'm going to go after him. That's not what he said. He says, absolutely I've considered Job, but I can't get to him. And that's just because you're a fraud. It's because you bought him off. It's because you bribed him. See, Satan, by his reply in verse 9, he acknowledges, yes, I've considered your servant Job, which tells me God didn't throw him under the bus. See, Satan had considered Job time after time after time after time. Are we to suppose that Job never had any difficulties in his life up to the point that God says, okay, he's in your hands? Are we to consider that Job never had a difficult day, that he never had loss of life in his family? Do we suppose that his mother and father are still alive, or perhaps he's had to bury them? Has he ever had difficulties in his financial life? He was a businessman. Should we assume that he never faced any difficulties? No, we shouldn't assume that, because of 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12 and 13. All the difficulties that man's face, all tribulations are common to all men. Job wasn't an exception that he never faced trials, tribulations in this world. Well, Satan said, well, I've tried to go after him, but you won't let me. So here's really what we see in the court of God. It is not that God is for the first time introducing Job. God, before all the heavenly host and all of humanity that comes after reading this book, is exposing Satan as the fraud, exposing Satan as a liar, exposing Satan for just exactly what he is. Have you considered Job? Yes. Why does he not worship you? Because you are not worthy. You're the one that's not worthy. Now, let's get to the accusation here. Made a hedge about him and about all of his house, all that he hath on every side. Bless the work of his hands, his substance is increased. Put forth his hand, touch all that he has, he'll curse thee to thy face. All right. Satan charges God of being unworthy. He accuses him of bribery, of fraud, and of corruption. The hedge about his house, his family. Hedge about all that he hath, his possessions. Here's another hedge. Bless the work of his hands, increased his substance. Well, the truth of the matter is, bribery is not the character of God. Bribery is the character of Satan. What did Satan tell Jesus in the temptation? If you worship me as worthy, then I will give you A, B, and C. But God says to all of humanity, I provide all of these things for you. The sun, the rain, fruitful seasons, Acts chapter 14 and verse 17. Whether you're good or evil, righteous or unrighteous, all things are provided. In fact, look at Acts chapter 17. Acts chapter 17, a tremendous chapter, starts about, I think, verse 22. Paul preaching in Athens, standing on Mars Hill, or the Areopagus. Acts 17, let me get there. Let's look at verse 24. We get right down to the sermon. Notice Paul's words. God that made the world and all things therein. Well, there's the power of God, God's omnipotence. Seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, there's the sovereignty of God. Dwelleth not in temples made with hands, there's the omnipresence of God. Neither is worship, verse 25. Do you have worshiped or a different word? Worship, what do you have? Worship, served. The Greek term carries the sense of serving, providing. See, the ancient Greeks would go into their temples and they would take food and they would take drink and leave it for their gods. Neither is served with hands of men, as though he needed anything. Why? Seeing that he giveth to all. I looked up the word all, James. You know what it means? It means everybody. He giveth to all. What does he give them? Life and breath and all things. What is man lacking that he needs? Nothing. Who provides it? God. Therefore, God is worthy. See, Job honors and worships and is devoted to God because God is worthy to be, not because he rewards him for it, but because he is worthy. Satan, his goal is going to be to destroy God in the eyes of Job. And in order to do that, he has to destroy Job. At least that's what he tries to do. James? We also need to understand that that Old Testament is also a picture of and a type of those spiritual things that we ultimately will receive too when we read that. Russell, some thought?
Riches in and of themselves, that's a test.
That's right.
How are we gonna
Yeah. You know what we often do as parents, we teach our children how to live without much money, but do we ever teach them how to live with money? Now, not only has Satan accused God, who else does he accuse? He also falsely accuses Job. And in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 10, of the old devil it says, he is the accuser of our brethren. He accused them before God day and night. Well, that's what he is. He's a slanderer. He's a false accuser. Now, what's the implication of all this? Here it is. God is not worthy of man's devotion and man's fear. Fear being reverence, awe, respect. All right? So in the book of Job, the first and great commandment is attacked. Is that not right? Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. But Satan attacks the first and greatest command because he says God's not worthy of it. What's the second command? Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. I'll tell you what, Satan attacks that one too, in the persons of Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Did they love Job as themselves? No. They falsely accused Job and slandered him. So Satan then is working. What does Jesus say of the first and second commandments? On them hang what? They are the very foundation of all that God commands man. And what does Satan do? He attacks the foundation. He attacks the foundation. Now, Satan has attacked God. What will God do? What would you do if you were attacked? Well, we're going to stop right there. I don't know what happened to my watchman, but I know he must have been called away on some business. But we're going to stop because it's about time for the bell. But I want you to, I'm going to ask a favor of you. I'm going to issue a challenge for it to you, and this is what it is. Between now and next Wednesday, I want you to read Job chapters 1 and 2. You ready for this? 10 times. Job chapters 1 and 2, 10 times. And what I want you to do as you read that, ask yourself this question. Satan has attacked Job, or has attacked God. What will God do? Satan has attacked God. What will God do? And we'll talk about that next week. Okay?